This is Kaushik Kadidar on behalf of Harvard Club of Bengaluru. Wanted to welcome you to this discussion on Black Lives Matter, Insights for India. We will have a 45-minute discussion with our panelists. There is a Q&A window available for you to submit questions. Please do submit your questions. We will have 15 minutes at the end of this session to pick a few questions from the submissions and have the panelists answer. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Jairaj, who will be moderating the event for today. Mr. Jairaj, over to you.
Thank you, Kaushik, and good day to all our colleagues who've joined us at this seminar on Black Lives Matter, Insights for India. First, I'd like to thank Kaushik and his team for organizing this and getting a galaxy of speakers and participants. My task is basically to introduce this subject very briefly, to bring out the format, and then to ask our speakers to give their opinion on this very vital subject. We've all been horrified by what happened in the United States on May 25th, 2020, after the brutal killing of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis. And that really sparked off a wave of protest and civil unrest and violence in many parts of the US. And when we thought that it was ebbing, just 2 days ago, we had the brutal shooting of another individual in Kenosha in Wisconsin, and he is stated to be in a crippled state and in intensive care. So this question raises the issue, can such a thing happen in India? Because India in many respects is a tinderbox, you know, the social discrimination we have and the other kinds of divide, including caste, community, are so prominent that it is time for us to reflect as to what could happen in India. And why Harvard alumni should reflect in particular is because in a way we are protected from all these happenings. We are kind of in a cocoon by ourselves. And therefore it is opportune. And I really thank Kaushik and his team for organizing this, because we can also introspect about it and reflect on what we need to do as individuals, enlightened individuals, to improve things and to reach out to each other and ensure that such things are not happening in India. So in order for us to do that, and that is the purpose of this seminar, we need to also put a light on our bias, what kind of bias we have, whether it is social bias or racial bias or gender bias or other kinds of bias that we have, how to overcome this bias, and after that kind of introspection to really ensure that we function as responsible and dignified individuals in our society and in the country. So that would be for the takeaway of this meeting. We have, as I said, 3 outstanding panelists today. We are expecting Gary to join us, but it is my pleasure to introduce Suraj Yengde and Ruha Shadab. Suraj is now a senior fellow at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and he works at the Initiative for Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability. He is a leading public intellectual and a noted scholar of caste. He is the author of the bestseller Caste Matters and the co-editor of The Radical in Ambedkar. And the book Caste Matters has been nominated to the prestigious Sahitya Academy Award. He has also worked with Professor Cornel West at Harvard, and he has issued a clarion call, so to speak, calling for unity between Dalits and African Americans. Welcome, Suraj. Thank you for joining us today. We also have Ruha Shadab. Ruha is a doctor, and she's a graduate from the Kennedy School of Government. She's worked in Delhi's low-income areas and on systemic issues of healthcare from Government of India programs. She is the founder of the LedBy Foundation, which provides professional training and mentorship to Muslim women college students. So she is an activist, and warm welcome to you, Ruha, this evening, today.
Thank you for having me.
We are also expecting Gary Cunningham, and I wonder
Gary is on,
if
Mr.
introduce
Jairaj.
him in absentia or wait for him to join us.
No, he's already on. Gary is on.
Oh, Gary.
You can go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Gary. Welcome to this program. Gary is a global C-level HR executive. He is a Harvard Business School alumnus. He's a certified senior professional in HR and executive coach. He has experienced and seen firsthand institutional racism and injustice, having grown up in the American South. His aim is to bridge the differences among people by emphasizing what unites us rather than what divides us. And as an African American and an openly gay man, Gary has championed the cause of equitable outcomes, increased representation for the underrepresented groups, and their inclusion in corporate America. So, welcome, Gary. Thanks for joining us today. So what I propose to do is I have a few questions for each of the panelists, and I will pose the questions at the outset. You're free, of course, to depart from the questions if you want to. And I would request, in view of the time constraints, each panelist to restrict themselves between 12 to 15 minutes. And then after that, we will have a few minutes, 15 minutes for questions. I'll begin with Gary. Gary, I have the following questions for you. The Black Lives Matter movement that we see in the United States today, does it have a deeper significance? Is it a manifestation of something that is going to bring about major changes in the kind of racism and institutional discrimination that we have in American society? In other words, what is going to be the impact of the Black Lives Movement on civil society in the United States? Go ahead.
Well, thank you all for inviting me to participate in this panel. I really appreciate it. These are heavy but important topics that we're discussing here today. Certainly, as you look at the news and you see protests and civil unrest in the streets here in America, around the world. Personally, I would like to thank you not only for being a part of this panel to have this discussion, but also thank you for shining a light on this topic and its significance. So Black Lives Matter, I think, is a manifestation of many decades. We could almost even say hundreds of years of oppression and injustice. And I think really what you have, if you look at sort of the cycle that's occurred maybe since the Watts riots in the 60s, going back to the Rodney King riots in LA, when a Black man was beaten in 1992, even progressing forward to now, you see that there is almost an algorithm for the system of oppression that occurs against Black and brown people in this country, that they feel pent up anger and frustration due to having poor housing conditions, inequitable healthcare outcomes, lacking really decent education compared to non-Black and brown counterparts. And it's almost as if every generation, every 30 or so years, they express this frustration through protesting, be it peaceful. Most of it's peaceful. Sometimes there's fringe with looters and violence, but for the most part, it's peaceful. And that's the overarching condition of the protest. But it occurs in that cyclical fashion, in my view, because it's not being addressed at the root cause. And so what I really hope, in answer to your question, is that, yes, I hope the movement that we're experiencing today will get at the root cause of the issue. And it's not that Black people, brown people are frustrated with only the police brutality. That is certainly the catalyst to ignite this fire. But there's so many other things systemically that are inequitable, that are disadvantageous, or even built to work against Black and brown people, that you see that frustration pouring out into the streets. And this generation being connected through social media and news cycles being as quick as what they are, and everyone holding a camera in their hand, I think allows an opportunity for us to catch these moments that really speak to our humanity in some of the worst ways. When we see young men being shot when they're unarmed, we see them being shot 7 times in the back, as the case with Jacob Blakely, or we see them shot and strangled in the street like George Floyd was by a police officer. These things now become connected, shared experiences in a way that they couldn't have before, in my view. And it galvanizes this movement to have more momentum. And I think the more people that participate in the movement, Black, white, brown, or other, it really gives it much more significance and weight. And so with that, I do think that we are moving in a direction to effect a change, unlike we've seen before. Now, I have to say that change is slow. It's hard won. Many people have historically suffered or died. And sadly, that's been the case here. But hopefully it does lead to a better outcome in the end. And I think we have greater chance to achieve that now than we ever had before.
So Gary, as a supplement to this, does the Black Lives Movement have broad-based support across the United States?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when Black Lives Matter started, that was maybe 10 years ago. It started when really sort of police brutality was highlighted. It was really kind of seen as more or less a fringe organization that was really speaking about something that I think most of America, one, wasn't ready to hear, and two, that they didn't have enough support on the ground to really affect change in a large-scale way. There wasn't enough people who would attach to the movement. But one of the things I think was really smart, that over the last 10 years, particularly with the current administration that we have, it has piqued an interest in this work. And the organizers of Black Lives Matter continue to build infrastructure and go out and recruit and hold talks and go out and protest. They maybe weren't televised, but it was still happening. And so they took the decade to really sort of organize and build this movement in a way where it could be sustained. And at this point, it has probably more support, and I forget the statistic that I heard most recently, but it is a majority of the country supports Black Lives Matter. I want to say that it's somewhere in the ballpark of 60+%. And so it has gained a lot of momentum through the diligent, consistent, and structured approach that's been taken with organizing the movement, keeping the movement relevant, showing up where injustice has occurred, and speaking plainly where people can grasp the message, which is Black Lives Matter, I can't breathe, these types of things. And so I think it's having a real impact. I think there's a large body of support behind it, and even funding now, which it didn't have in the early days. And I think as more prominent people, celebrities, politicians, as the like, you've probably seen several weeks ago, members of Congress marching with protesters when the current presidential administration decided to gas people in Lafayette Park when they were peacefully protesting. These things caused Black Lives Matter to gain more support at higher levels. And so that's what you're seeing playing out in the street. And I think it will have a bigger outcome, a bigger impact than it could have 10 years ago because of this.
Thank you, Gary, for that very thoughtful response. You really helped us to understand and place the Black Lives Movement in a proper perspective. Thank you. I'll now turn to Suraj. Suraj, what do you think are the parallels between the Black Lives Matter issues in the United States and social discrimination in India, of which you've written so well and so extensively?
Thank you. Thank you to the Harvard Club of Bengaluru and Kaushik and Mr. Jairaj and the team for hosting this, and also regards to my co-panelists here. What Gary actually talked about with regard to the Black Lives Movement, as we can understand, it's not a simple, straightforward answer. It took him, some time to even articulate where we are coming at this point, which means there have been antecedents to what we see right now. And I think, as they say, it's the, if you will, if it's a motion that was desiring an action, or in the spirit of Malcolm Gladwell, the tipping point. And I think similarly in Indian context, what we see is the complexity exists even in Indian side. So then we have these two complexities that exist. One here is compared to the race, which is color, and now it's talking the color caste or racial caste system. And the other in India is the caste, which is coming, which is across all the religions in India. And with these two complexities, and some of us who live in India, or at least have knowledge about India's caste system, know how complex it is. One doesn't just give a simple answer. There has to be a lot of footnotes to one answer when we talk about caste, because the simplification reduces a lot of things that kind of go with it. Now, when we look at the BLM as itself a complex movement, it's not just, as Gary was pointing out aptly, it's not just the police brutality, but it's also the economic deprivation, the marginalization of people from participating as equal citizens, the voting registration, the way it was taken away, discouraging people from voting, and that happened during the previous presidential election. Similarly, in Indian context, what we have is the layers of marginalizations that operate in India, and caste sits at the center. Caste is the mother of all problems in India. In childhood, they would tell us population is the mother of all problems. As I come to realize and read more and expose to this myself to the world and solicit responses to that, I recognize that caste is that. And the reason it remains so subtle and so lively is because we have utilized ways to two things. One is to euphemistically use it. We don't identify caste in blatant C word. We might use in different, what community you are from, or what do your parents do, where do you live. These are all the markers of your caste belonging. What school did you go to? Who are your relatives? And then when it comes to marriage, who are you marrying? Your sister, your brother, who did you marry to? So these are all caste markers. We just don't call it caste because we are too embarrassed to hold on to the caste, yet we hold on to. And the second aspect of the caste is to invisibilize it. One is, of course, using euphemisms. And the second is we basically declare a caste blindness to ourselves. We just say, I don't see caste. It's almost like, the story of a cat. Closing eye doesn't mean the world is not watching you, because we still, if you benefit from casteism, then we hold on to it, because there is someone who has to profit out of discrimination. People just don't discriminate for the sake of some pleasurable game only. There is a lot of stakes in that. There is a psychological pleasure one gets. One has a strict power relations where one needs to overpower the other person. And how does then one do that is to call that, I am superior. And that happens especially Actually, I was just looking at a video yesterday, was shared with me in Tamil Nadu, a Brahmin priest, uh, uh, a guy, frail guy, but yet he had the audacity to challenge like 3 to 4 people who were Dalits who tried to enter a temple. And I was just thinking to myself, this guy is almost, if a wind comes with certain speed, he might, not able to stand on his feet. Yet, where does he muster the courage to talk to, strong men for the reason of entering the sanctum or the temple? And I think that is what it is. It grants this authority for this frail old Brahmin to feel that he is a supreme, he is a powerful, and there is an acquiescence that if I do anything, I will get acquittal. I will not be held responsible for my actions. And why do I go? So why do parents beat their children? Because parents know it's not gonna put them in jail. It's not gonna be a response. Child is not gonna hit back with the same force. And I think similarly, when somebody is perpetuating caste on a person who's weaker economically, socially, what we do is then reproduce that form of imbalances. And I think to compare or to think about this issue simultaneously is, we have had so many instances of George Floyd's in India. It's just that it does not get, does not register our mind. I'll tell you, George Floyd could have been in India and we would have just said, oh, so sad, and we could have just walked past. And the reason I also say that in the sense is because when this was happening, I write also in my article for the Karma, there were 3 other incidents of Dalit murders around the same time. And it was reported in the media. Yet we normalize. So a Dalit rape and a Dalit murder is a common occurrence. And we have normalized the Dalit brutality in our mind that it doesn't tinker our consciousness. We don't feel depressed. We don't feel angry and anguished. But we have a bone to feel sorry for George Floyd, which is thousands of miles away. What does it say? In this, what it says is, the murderer there was a white man. So I'm happy to put the blame on the white man, the white police officer. But here in India, if I start talking about the murder of Bansode or someone else, then that's going to be where my responsibility and my complicity is going to come. And I think we need to then think parallelly as to how the other liberals, for example, we saw in BLM, almost every other color and race was on the street and across the age. Most of them, of course, were the what we call Gen Z or millennials who fronted the brutality of policies. But in India, this was my question constantly. When we have these incidents, when can I see this multi-caste, multilingual, multi-regional protest coming on? We have that for Muslims, don't get me wrong. When something happens to Muslims in India, at least there is a consciousness, there is a responsibility that we need to come out. But on the same stream, with the same feet, we don't see responses coming for Dalit murders or Adivasi murders. Adivasis, as we all know, were expelled. 10 lakh of them were with the Forest Rights Act. If you have followed, they were just exiled. They were just made landless. A huge land grabbing scheme happening in India with the state as well as the private corporations. Now, Adivasis are already landless. They have their own things. And now they are expelled from whatever they have. What do they have now? Nothing. And then they will become. But we have not created a kind of sustainable protest to that. So I just wanted to bring to home our responses and responsibilities in this.
That's a very stark description of the actual caste situation, but you're absolutely correct, Suraj. This leads me to a question I want to ask you. Post-independent India, after 70 years, with India becoming cosmopolitan and modernizing, has the hold of caste decreased substantially?
That's an interesting question, Mr. Jairaj, and I think I appreciate you raising that. And I think, in India, see, modernity, if you look through historical, especially European experiences, modernity had challenged 3 fundamental basics of pre-modern thought. One was the lack of reason. One was not asked to reason, and this is basically Kantian philosophy, that be centered. Then also the Descartesian thought was to engage with the individualism, was to think about my individual role in what I can do. And third was to challenge the old age hold of religion. And that meant, rationality. Modernity came with these concepts that brought new logos of freedom, that brought new language, vocabularies of freedom, and as well as, a sovereign dialogue. And we just look this because it's a recent history. In India, modernity came with Brahminism. When we brought modernity, when we created high towers of IITs and IIMs, and this is a book Ajanta Subramanian just came out with, Caste of Merit. She talks about how IITs, when they were created, they were actually a safe haven for Brahmins. Close to 68% Brahmins on IIT Madras, while the IITs were founded by the German German institutions, German scientists came and established. So when industrialization happened, it was actually modernity equals industrialization, as we always equate with the Nehruvian socialism. It's a very wrongly placed concept, because when Nehru was modernizing, the edifice was constructed with strict caste notions. So you talk about the big institutions in India. Look at the caste diversity ratio. Even IIMs, IITs, there is you will see a huge discrepancy within the IIMs. I think there are 13 IIMs or 14 IIMs. The last I checked was the number was of all the IIMs, 1,200 plus professors, there was no Adivasi professor. There were 2 Dalits. So what we are saying is, in this modernity, Mr. Jairaj, we have embraced modernity to only self-congratulate, in the sense that when the new, for example, scientific innovations were made, or the new industries were launched, the Banyas were the custodians of this. It is no accident that these people got huge contracts, and these are the people who built airlines and big industries. There was a clear plan to promote such form of economy that will make us reliant. And then it was, of course, the political kind of way. So the modernity that goes alongside in India has really failed the very idea of modernity, unfortunately. Why? Because we still have Dalits and Adivasis ranking in the most bottom when it comes to, on the most bottom when it comes to education, health, as well as in the political sort of mobilization and representation.
So Suraj, just one final issue on that. The courts in India, the Indian constitution and the state, to what extent have they contributed to a reduction in the caste blindness, so to speak, of the population?
So you mean the constitution or the courts?
The constitution, the enforcement of the constitution by the courts, and the state as an instrument of executive power, have they helped in reducing caste dichotomies in India?
Yes, relatively yes, but to the expectation, no. Simply because it's due to the constitution that we have some progressive values and principles that we can adhere to. Right. Had it not been the progressive liberal constitution that we have now, we would not even have opened up space for the people from marginalized communities to enter into the high towers of this coveted spaces. But also the court system itself is a Brahminical corrupted system. And this has coming very much front. You have to ask, what is the caste-wise representation of Supreme Court judges in India? Right. Like in America, there is about various ideologies, various races, various genders, sexualities are being discussed there. If there is a Clarence Thomas, and then of course there is Ruth Ginsburg, and then we have Kavanaugh. So we know there is a certain form of democratic practice that takes place, although it's political. In India, that doesn't happen. The collegial system decides for themselves. It's basically a bunch of Brahmin Baniya boys in their old age who get it's a collegial system. There is no transparency. Right. What do I know what merit this person has? And this has proved time and again when former Chief Justice Gogoi gave all these decisions on the created all this spaces and for Ayodhya and other forms of highly contested decisions he gave, there were no checks. And now he's sitting in Rajya Sabha. Similarly, the current Chief Justice of India, and we know the case of Prashant Bhushan and how. And so what has happened is, as a civic society, we are not even encouraged to ask questions on these because they are so scared. And I'll tell you, Outlook did a report of the top judges, of the top judges of the Supreme Court. There were 4 judges on the Supreme Court who were relatives of former judges. And who were, when I say relative, 2 of them were the children. So when we talk about nepotism, when we talk about all of this, a kind of a streamlining of justice, we don't see such form of justice that is being given to us. And so to answer your question, the Constitution has managed to do that. The state is trying in its way. Is it successful? I don't think so, but it is trying, and their efforts needs to be, at least acknowledged. Whereas the court system, it is underrepresentative institution. There is no diversity of people from various castes. Religion you have, that's what I'm saying. You have religion, you have minority Parsis, but you don't have this Dalit and Adivasi, the 25% of population sitting in the High Court or Supreme Courts.
Thank you, Suraj, for your very clear exposition. Let me come to Ruha. Ruha, you worked extensively on issues facing the minority community, especially minority women. Can you draw any kind of parallel or similarity between Black issues in America today and the minority issue in India?
Thanks, Jairaj. I'd also just like to echo most of Suraj's points, and also his thanks to the entire team organizing this webinar. Before I speak, I want to start with a caveat. So the Black movement in America's historical underpinnings are very unique. I would never even imagine saying that there are any parallels with the historical injustices and brutality faced by them. But I do feel that the injustices faced by them on a day-to-day basis is something that resonates very closely to lived realities of a lot of minority people back home in India. Having said that, I'd like to also share that I've only lived outside of India twice. So I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. And then most recently, I just wrapped up my master's degree in the US, and I was in India for the entire time in the middle. And I say that because I want to talk about 2 things that happened in Saudi. And this again echoes to Suraj's point about, does our conscience get triggered when we hear of a Dalit rape or a Dalit murder? So in Saudi, we had heard stories about Filipino nurses and Indian nurses going missing, and it was casual talk. Apparently one fine day, an American nurse went missing, got abducted, and all hell broke loose by the US embassy in Saudi then. And suddenly everything came into check. What I heard uncles and aunties say was ki Indian life ki value nahi hai. And I feel that even right now, right? Why does one shot in the US lead to this global movement? Why will it take, how many Dalit murders and rapes will it take to trigger India's conscience? How expendable are our people is something that comes to mind when we think about this. The second thing I wanted to share from my Saudi experience was I was caste blind entirely. I was hanging around with Muslims constantly. Like the only discrimination I knew was India-Pakistan when the cricket matches would happen. And then I moved to India and suddenly I'm like, okay, everybody doesn't do salam over here. Nobody really knows what Eid is. And also, oh my God, I had all these Hindu friends who wanted to have temples in their houses in Saudi. And that must have felt really, really bad to them. And then I started also seeing things like, why do we have steel glasses for our maids and different cutlery for us? I would almost argue the thing that makes Indian Muslims Indian is the caste system. Like, honestly, that is how we are most Indian. And the reason I'm saying this is, again, you don't get to hear dialogues within the community, right? Like, I actually don't know what happens when there are 20 Hindus at a dinner party. I only know what happens at interreligious parties because I'm there. Right? I don't know what Dalits are saying to each other and what their issues are. And that's why I want to take this platform and talk a little bit about what are the conversations that are happening behind closed doors. Like, there are, of course, Ashraf, non-Ashraf, casteist conversations happening. There are regional discrimination conversations happening between Muslims. There are sexist, patriarchal conversations happening between Muslims. And I agree there's an ecosystem problem, but there is so much that can be and should be done within the community that is not necessarily spoken of. And you need to go all guns blazing at this point of time, like fix things within the community, external to the community. And that brings me to the Black Lives Matter movement. Like I said, historically, completely different ballgame. But there is a lot of solidarity that can be taken from this movement. Now, movements are actually built upon one another. Like Gary started off narrating like this lineage. And I think that movements don't necessarily need to be just built on vertically. They can also be built on horizontally by gaining strength and solidarity from other movements happening for liberal causes. And that's where I draw resonance from the Black Lives Matter movement. I think the strength that they have exhibited, it's been a pretty well-organized movement to show that, yes, you can get multiple ethnicities, multiple races to come and talk about this movement and demand their rights. Like right now, Muslims aren't even saying कि यार citizenship दे दो, मतलब हम उस level पे पहुंचे हैं, like हक तो दूर की बात करो, यहाँ पे तो stateless बनने के लिए आए हैं. I'm sorry, I'm breaking into Hindi. Just assuming that some people can understand that, but just even the level of asks is so different, and it's scary, right? Because that just tells you how disenfranchised this community is. That this is like when they get on the streets, they literally think just let us be citizens, and they're not even asking for rights beyond that. So that's where I think we resonate with the Black Lives Matter movement, is the strength and courage that they have exhibited in claiming and asking for their rights. It's quite commendable.
So, Ruha, your foundation provides professional training and mentorship to Muslim women college students. As an enlightened person, what are you telling those Muslim women, young women, about gender equality within the Muslim community and the kind of discrimination they undergo at the hands of the elders and the Muslim men in particular?
It's very tricky. We have created a brave and a safe space for them to have conversations. Earlier today, one of my fellows, so our fellows, like you said, are college-going minority women. And she told me that she actually had to miss a session because her parents thought that this was some very activist platform, and she thought wo bigar rahi hai by coming and having discussions over here beyond just education. So I told her, would it help if the foundation spoke with their parents? And she said they would just never say yes. And she's like, for the last 5 years, I haven't been telling them things I've been doing for education and my own professional development. So this is no different. So it's a very tricky space to talk about how to perhaps, reach out to the audience beyond our fellows. But what we are doing is preparing them to have those conversations. Most of our conversations have actually also revolved around the levels of religiosity within Indian Muslim women and how they deal with that. So even just taking the hijab and not taking the hijab is a huge issue over here. And just understanding that the Indian Muslim women movement is also an umbrella movement, and to give space for those conversations is where we're focusing right now.
Okay. So before we move to the questions that have been asked, I want to ask our panelists, is there anything else you would like to add by way of comments to what you've already said? Gary? Yeah. Okay. Suraj?
I just had a statistics of the Supreme Court. Just want to put it out when it comes to the caste. So there are total judges plus this Chief Justice of India. There are 31 Supreme Court judges, including the CJI. 12 are Brahmins. 2 are belonging to the Kshatriya. There is 1 Parsi. Then the Kayastha caste, there are 4. Then within the non-OBC, which is again the dominant caste, the Kammas of Andhra, there are 2. 1 Maratha, 1 Reddy, which makes them 4. 2 OBC, 1 Christian, 1 Muslim, 1 Dalit, and 2 women. This is just for the, and of course there is a breakup of diversity. I'll just gonna retweet this on the Twitter so you guys can find out.
Thanks, Suraj. Ruha, anything you would like to add? Unmute.
Yeah, I do want to add that for everybody over here who's taken out the time to listen to us and to think about this, I think it's really important to realize that if you have the privilege of knowing, you don't have the luxury of not doing. I grappled with that question, right? Like, how much is it my individual right to live my best life? And I don't think we have that. I think everyone has a duty towards the society that they live in. And you cannot be an ostrich. You can't be that cat. You have to speak up now more than ever.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions that have been posed by our participants, and I'll present them. One is by Meghna Prasad. This is to Gary. Gary, how openly is Black Lives Matter being discussed in corporate workplaces? Is it restricted to private conversations between colleagues, or is it happening and even being initiated intentionally by company leaders during team and leadership meetings and company town halls? That's a question posed by Meghna Prasad to Gary. Gary? Unmute, Gary. Unmute. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Magna, for the question. I would say it would depend on the organization. One of the things that we know, certainly in my profession, is that the workplace is a microcosm of society. And it means what occurs outside finds its way inside. And at some point, leaders, managers have to be able to deal with what that means in the workplace. And so Black Lives Matter is absolutely no different. I think probably more than any other time, and I remember the Rodney King riots, I remember Trayvon Martin, but unlike any other time when George Floyd was murdered, I think because it was so graphic, because it was so visual, it was so visceral to watch, it forced it to come up more so in the workplace than anything else. There was a real reckoning that needed to take place with how not only Black people and brown people were feeling about what happened with George Floyd, but it was also people with many different ethnic and racial backgrounds who were also too upset and distraught about it. And that forced more of a reckoning inside organizations. There needed to be more discussions. And so the short answer is yes. I know, for example, colleagues that I have that work in the human resource profession, as well as myself, we spent a lot of time over the last several months really trying to figure out what does it mean for our diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives and the strategies that we already had in place, which, this trend started, let's say, 30 years ago, but really has a hard time gaining a foothold to be able to make some significant difference. Now with Black Lives Matter and the murder of George Floyd, there are discussions past how do we increase representation? How do we become more diverse? How do we create an inclusive culture? These things are changing a little bit now that the conversation is around how do we support the Black community, not just inside of the workplace, but also to outside of the workplace. How do we fight anti-racism? Not how do we be diverse, how do we fight anti-racism? And so, or promote anti-racism, excuse me. And so these are shifts that have occurred in the dialogue that takes place in the workplace. And I can tell you, just for example, with my own team, when these things come up in the news, there's a real need for leaders to recognize them, hold space for their employees to be able to discuss them and sort of, give voice to how they're feeling about it, particularly since we're working in a multi-generational context in most workplaces, particularly if your company is a large company like mine, then people want to talk about it. They even want time off to protest, and you have to be supportive of that. So I think organizations are finding, more so than before, how do we deal with the civil unrest? How do we give people room to express that professionally and in a human way, and how do we support them? And I think it's changing the way that we look at diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives and programs in the workplace. And I do think that that's in large part to the work that Black Lives Matters has done, but also to the raised consciousness of American society around watching George Floyd be murdered in the street.
Thank you, Gary. This is a question from Mr. S.S. Naganand, one of the distinguished legal practitioners of Bangalore. He asks, Sanatana Dharma of India recognizes that the whole world is one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Is there such a concept in any other part of the world? Is this a solution to change society's thinking? I'll pose it to Suraj and request him to respond to that. Suraj?
Mr. Jairaj, Ruha had a response to after Gary. Maybe you should.
Oh, sure. Sorry, go ahead, Ruha. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Suraj. I just had one point to put to the panelists, actually, to what Gary's, the question was addressed to Gary about diversity and inclusion in the corporate space. So the social enterprise that I run focuses on professional development, and we want representation of Muslim women in corporate India to increase. And something that we've been grappling with is what puts Muslim discrimination in India in such a unique position is that you're discriminated based on your religious identity, but you're constitutionally prohibited from having any affirmative action based on the identity that is the source of discrimination. So you can't go to corporates and talk to them, hey, you need to improve Muslims because D&I. They've clearly shut us out and they're like, oh, we can't discriminate based on religion positively. But in brackets, we're doing it negatively. So just wanted to put that out there, how that is quite a difficult issue to deal with.
Thank you, Ruha.
Thank you, Suraj.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand. My apologies. Suraj, you want to respond to that?
Yes, I would love to take on that as well. So, I mean, I'm slightly unclear with the question. It seems like it itself says that, so it's asking if such concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, all world is one, a family, about in other religion. Now, I don't know. There must be something about other religion as well.
Suraj, is it a solution to solve the problems of the world?
To think about all world as a family?
To think all people as a belonging to a family.
I mean, we do think that, right? It's not that we don't think about it.
Right.
But also we think more that other person is lesser human and lesser human is animal. So so what we essentially do is, that's why we have all the epithets surrounding animals. Are you donkey? Are you monkey? Because we want to reduce the human value of the person. Even in normal conversations, parents animalize their own children in a way that to show that the evolution has not reached, but I think this concept is very interesting. That how do we think of the whole world as a family, and if we think about it, is there a solution? See, I don't think that will a solution. Unfortunately, why do I think that is? Because my answer is conditioned with a pragmatism. I mean, even if we think, even in our own family, we don't think we are one family, because there are itself a huge discrepancies in our individual thought, and we might get together for occasional gatherings, but apart from that, everyone is on their own. So what that means is we are still wrestling with the question of individuality and how I negotiate my uniqueness in the position of the family, which tries to assimilate me as not a person of unique character, but you are part of this. So, it's almost like groupism. Instead of that, how about we think, yeah, it's fine. You can go ahead. That's okay with me.
No, go ahead, please finish it.
No. I was just saying, instead of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which could be possible in India, we are hate our neighbor, not love our neighbor, and that's why we have so many conflicts with our neighbors. These are all lofty ideals, and it's good to live with it. But how do we emulate is the question. We have the greatest religion, greatest civilization, greatest everything in the world, and yet we are a failed country. Okay. How do we progress? How do we go to the next step? Is to look at the self-criticism and try to see, I done this wrong. Let me try to fix it. And I think that's what people defend their wrong actions by talking about 5,000-year-old writings. How is that even possible? You have no role to play in that, But I just wanted to kind of put that out as a provocation.
Okay, Suraj. There's a question for Ruha from Meera Rao. In the US, there is widespread discussion on BLM and BPOC issues, systemic racism, inherent bias. Is there an equally robust discussion in India on matters regarding Dalits, bias against Muslims, etc.? If not, how it can be remedied? Ruha?
Thank you. That's a really comprehensive question. So yes, these dialogues are happening in the US, and that's fantastic because all said and done, BLM has already had positive effects across the world, right? People are talking about police brutality everywhere from Africa and Asia because of what's happening in America. As for closer to home, do we have such conversations about Dalits and Muslims, and then Dalits within Muslims? Like, let's not forget, like, there's this huge caste question within Muslim that isn't often enough spoken about. I feel these conversations have started. I mean, Shaheen Bagh is one thing that kickstarted it. A lot of amazing Dalit academicians have been talking about it for a while, but like you said, movements build on movements. I don't think we're near that inflection point. I think there's a lot of hard work that still needs to be done. And what is the solution? The solution is for more such conversations to happen, for people to not say that they don't see caste or they don't see color. There are a lot of policy improvements that need to be done. And we also need to start holding up our elected representatives based on morals and values and not just infrastructure promises.
Thank you. There is a question from Praveen Ashok, and I think this will be the last question. Dalits, Adivasis, and marginalized in India are looking outwards towards global solidarity, but internally they are unable to forge any viable inclusive movements and keep on looking towards Dalit Panther movement with nothing moving in the direction of building a mass movement. This is for Suraj. Suraj?
No, I appreciate the question, and I think the question is very important, and it requires a reflection, a serious meditation, at least on behalf of all of us, as to why are such solidarities unable to. I mean, at least as Ruha was saying, within the NRC protest movement, whatever happened, there was at least a certain move of inclusivity within the challenging a certain right-wing agenda, which was obviously pitting one group against another. But Praveen's question is very important. As regard to the mass movement, Praveen, I think mass movements are already existing. It's just that we are not paying attention to them. When the Prevention of Atrocities Act was meddled by Supreme Court in April 2018, I think close to some, I don't exactly have numbers, Dalit youth came on the street, and 40,000 people were charged with cases. So that's like a huge number. And of them, there were a lot of deaths by police firing as well. So the Dalit protest movement doesn't register as a mass movement, simply because we don't look it at as a creative apparatus that can forge some sort of leadership to emerge. But with the other extra examples, but I take your question with more thoughtfulness, and I welcome it. Thank you.
So there's a last question, folks, and then we'll wrap up. And this is in the nature of to all the panelists. I'm looking forward, this is from BT, I'm looking forward for action points. I'm sure there's a load of thoughts, examples against the problem. I'm not a Brahmin, but I want meritocracy to be the rule. I'm happy to help, but I don't want to get displaced. I want the panelists to lead by examples of action. In public, everyone looks good, but in private life, they do what is good for their immediate family. So I'm going to request each of the panelists to respond to that briefly before we wrap it up. I'll begin with Gary. Gary, would you like to have a go at that question?
Sure. I think it's a good question. So thank you for it. And the reason why I say that is because I think there have been many years, let's say since 1619, when the first African-American slaves were brought over from Africa to the United States. There's been 400 years of oppression and injustice. And I think that the United States, being the city on a hill, as it were, has a moral and ethical obligation to do better by its citizens. At this point, Americans, when slavery first started, African Americans made up 4 million people as part of the total US population. That number grew over time to be what it is today, where we have 13 to 15% of the US population is African American. The numbers are larger, obviously, if we factor in other ethnic and racial groups. The point that I'm making is we cannot continue to be silent And when we talk about these topics, we must take action because the oppression, the injustice has gone on for far too long just by people being aware of it and not talking and not doing anything about it. So to that end, I think there are many things that can be done. One is I think there's a real opportunity for ordinary citizens to engage their civic and municipal leaders in dialogue and encourage them to take action. Go out and help your colleagues, your family members, your friends who feel the same way, who have like hearts and like mind. Galvanize them, bring them together around this common cause to get this work done in your communities to start to force a change in your caste system, but also too in the treatment of people who are disenfranchised. I think it's also too important that you think about where the sources of power in your community come from. If they're coming from religious organizations, if they're coming from civic organizations, if they're coming from corporate organizations, I think there's a real opportunity to work in a structured way and partner, particularly in these times, partner with them to really figure out how can we support your employees, your citizens, your congregations to be able to think differently about this topic and really then begin to take action. Part of the inaction, in my view, that occurs in the U.S. is due to ignorance, or it's due to just saying, "Hey, that's not my problem." And I think what Black Lives Matter has done is it really has forced this conversation around and this idea that yes, all lives matter, but all lives can't matter fully until all Black lives matter. And so we have really tried very hard to wrap ourselves in this idea that everything is okay because we now have Black mayors, or we had a Black president, or Black people now on average compared to 50 years ago, or they're more small business owners. These things are just sort of, I would say, signs that there's still more work to do when you look at the numbers. In terms of income disparage, when you look at sort of the health outcomes and the quality of treatment as well as access, when you think about participation at leadership levels within civic organizations, within government, and within corporate America, there's so much more work to be done. And that's going to require action, but it has to come, in order for it to be lasting, sustainable, it has to come from, I think at this point, which is where the Black Lives Matter movement is shifting, it not only has to occur with politicians in Congress, it has to occur in corporate America. Why you see so many organizations coming out and taking a stance and pushing back against anti-racism unlike ever before, because this is a source of power. Our economy, our wealth in this country, and now that's coming into play, and really it will have an effect. So think about what you can do to start the dialogue, which is an important point. 2, to organize your friends, family around these power centers, and then influence those power centers to take action. That would be my message to the questioner. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Gary. Ruha, please.
Thank you. First of all, that question is a really candid question, so I appreciate BT for sharing that. So the person is saying that there are 2 things, right? That you want India to be a meritocratic nation, but you also don't want to give space. And I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people. I think if you want one actionable advice, I would suggest have an uncomfortable and open conversation every month. That's it. Find somebody who you don't think you agree with, find somebody who doesn't want a meritocratic system because they feel like they've been through historical injustices and need a leg up. But have open, uncomfortable questions. That would be my only piece of actionable advice.
Thank you, Ruha. Suraj?
I'll just piggyback on this excellent intervention of Gary and Ruha, actually, and just offer one, what actionable items they suggested. And one is, one need not be a Brahmin. So when I gave the example of the Brahmin person who was a priest, but the priest Brahmins are the lower caste Brahmins among the Brahmin castes. The upper caste Brahmins are the ones who are your editors, who are your business owners, the Nilekanis, and the people who rule the basically. So let's not find the easy target. And that's why I always try to say, we should go against the power, the people who are, heavy lifters and who are basically making the choices and decisions. They might not be around you, but their invisibilized force is around you. And I think for us to be an educated person is to have that enlightened vision to find out this is not the easy scapegoat I want to, attack. We should go beyond that. And I think I would just recommend that, if you have to progress, if there are 4 males in this place, I should be able to excuse myself to create more spaces for females or sexual minorities, simply because I should realize that is and I've been doing that, ever since being at Harvard or anywhere else, because I have recognized that there are certain privileges I also carry. And these are privileges where I need to shed, because it feels good. It feels good to put yourself at a disadvantaged position by law or by your own choice, simply because you're trying to correct something that your ancestors couldn't do. And I think it's a very godly job to do.
Thank you. I think, first of all, we owe a debt of gratitude to our panelists, Gary, Ruha, and Suraj, for the extraordinarily candid and open manner in which they have addressed this subject. I think in a way it meets what Ruha said, that to talk about an uncomfortable subject and to be open about it is really one way of getting over this issue. And so that is something I would like to thank the panelists immensely on behalf of the Harvard Alumni Group of Bengaluru. Secondly, I want to extend a deep sense of gratitude and thanks to the Harvard Alumni Bangalore, especially Kaushik, Shruti, Meghna, and others, for having put together this webinar today. And also, getting the best in the world to focus on this important subject. And they have really worked hard for this. And I think, folks, we need to congratulate Kaushik and all the others for what they have done. Just 2 comments before we conclude, because the hard stop is 8:40. I don't think India is a failed state. I say this because I have worked in India for the better part of 3 decades. And I can unhesitatingly say that while, we may not have made a success of all the efforts that have been undertaken towards a just and good society, the effort has been visible. The problems have been unsurmountable in many ways because they are not regional or local problems. They are of a continental dimension. I'm not trying to escape a responsibility from this, but I'm saying that we must encourage the efforts here to create a just and fair society, because I agree at the end of the day, all of us are equal and there cannot be discrimination on the basis of caste or creed or community. And I think we have to work towards that dimension. So if there is one outcome for me from this webinar initiated by the Harvard alumni, that outcome is to introspect on what I need to do as an individual in order to create a better society, and what my responsibility is towards the public good. I think that really is the implicit purpose in this webinar. And I would again like to thank the panelists and the organizers for this unique opportunity of reflecting on this subject of such great importance. Thank you very much. And
Mr. Jairaj, we owe you an applause and appreciation for that excellent emceeing the event. Very, very appreciated.
I'll come and
thanks, Suraj.
at the Kennedy School when I visit you in Cambridge.
Yeah, thanks, Suraj. I was going to say that, Mr. Jairaj, thanks a lot for moderating it. And this is an uncomfortable conversation, and it takes somebody who knows the subject and the language to be able to navigate this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gary, Ruha, and Suraj for enlightening us. Thank you all the participants for joining the call. We shall end it now. Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye. Yes.